NonCompete.com.
Hi, everybody. I'm Crystal Haynes. Tonight on Greater Boston, the FTC has banned non-compete agreements for U.S. workers, and the business community is vowing to fight back. We'll debate what those rules mean for workers and their employers here in Massachusetts. Then, food and culture go hand in hand, but what happens when beloved dishes become big business? GBH News' Callie Crossley joins me to share her thoughts. And finally, one man's decades-long search for one last connection to his late brother. He shares his story ahead. Non-compete clauses are no more. The Federal Trade Commission voted to ban them this week for all U.S. workers, arguing the clauses help keep wages down and keep workers in hostile conditions. The new rules will take effect in August and will negate most existing non-competes. But business organizations are already pushing back, including the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which filed a lawsuit to block this rule. Business and employment attorney Andrew Boddy is against the FTC's decision. He joins me now along with Terry Gerstein, director of the NYU Wagner Labor Initiative, who is in favor of this ruling. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Terry, so let's catch folks up who may not, been following this as closely as all of us have. How is this a win for folks in workplaces?
So non-compete provisions in employment contracts prevent workers from being able to get a job with a competitor of their employer for a given period of time. And increasingly, they've been used in a really broad range of workplaces. The FTC's estimate is that 18% of workers, or around 30 million people, are subject to them. And this means that people, if they get a better job with someone across the street or, in a different part of town, that they're not allowed to move and to change jobs because they have a non-compete. And what this means for workers also is that it ends up resulting to obviously lower job mobility, but also it has a wage suppressing impact because workers can't go get that better job that pays more, and they can't use the threat of leaving to be able to negotiate for more with their employer. So the FTC's the rule that would ban non-competes really puts workers in a much better position and also helps the economy because it's better non-competes. There's lots of evidence showing they're bad for innovation and new firm formation and, bad for entrepreneurialism in various ways.
Well, Andrew, the FTC estimates that banning non-compete agreements could raise wages by nearly $300 billion a year. Why is it a bad thing?
I'm not sure where they got that number, quite frankly. I had to look into this granularly about 10 years ago when I was the chairman of the Smaller Business Association in New England. And my members wanted the non-compete law to stay the way it was. There were certain legislators fighting that. And so I testified on Beacon Hill a couple of times, and I did some research before I went up there. What I found was very interesting was that in California, particularly in Silicon Valley, they had fewer startups than we had here in Massachusetts. And Massachusetts has enforced non-compete since 1811. Silicon Valley, California, they don't allow non-competes. So there didn't seem to be any correlation between, starting a new business and having non-competes in your state. And I'll also say that the same was true statistically with figures having to do with employment. The unemployment rate in Silicon Valley was about 11.9%. In Mass, it was about 5%. And in the Research Triangle, which is also a place that allows non-competes, it was only 8%. So again, there's a bit of a disconnect between the arguments about non-competes harming the economy and not harming the economy.
Well, Andrew, what's the value add here then to keep these non-competes in place?
The value added, for example, is 89% of the businesses in Mass have 20 and fewer employees. So the companies that are dealing with these traditionally are much smaller entities than something like Dell or General Motors. So it's very important for them to be able to protect their intellectual property and confidential information, to the extent that they're not undone by some unscrupulous person. So what I found in my practice was that a lot of times the employers were willing to let the people out of the non-compete because either they weren't going into a company that competed directly, or they were going to a company that was a lot smaller, and even though they competed in some aspects, most of it was not a situation where they were competing directly. So it's not the case that these things are like handcuffs on people. It really depends on the given situation as to whether people are going to be let off the employment contract or not. And also, I'll say just one more thing. The judges have tremendous power to make decisions in equity on these agreements. I've had judges lower the amount of time that the non-compete was in effect. I've had them lower the geographical area, make it smaller. So again, it's really a fluid situation. It's not something that you could just make one statement about.
Well, I want to read this statement from Lena Khan, the chair of the Federal Trade Commission, on this ruling. And she writes, non-compete clauses keep wages low, suppress new ideas, and rob the American economy of dynamism, including from the more than 8,500 new startups that would be created once non-competes are banned. That goes to your point about small businesses. The FTC's final rule to ban non-competes will ensure Americans have the freedom to pursue a new job, start a new business, and bring a new idea to the market. Terry, I want you to weigh in here. Do you think keeping the non-competes will benefit small business or help them?
Well, there's actually, there's plenty of, we've heard some anecdotal evidence just now, and there's plenty of anecdotal evidence, from employers and from workers. But what's really interesting that's come out in the past several years is that a number of states have passed laws banning or curbing non-competes in various ways. And so that has created a number of natural experiments, what economists call natural experiments, where they can compare what happens in a state where you ban non-competes or you really limit them versus where you allow them free rein. And there's been a real torrent of research on this in the past several years. And it has overwhelmingly showed that when you allow non-competes, that is harmful for new firm formation. So in other words, states that curbed non-competes had more new businesses started. There was one piece of research that I found fascinating that showed that where you had where you limited non-competes, there were more patents that were submitted, and that the patents were more innovative than where non-competes were permitted. And so, I think the evidence really shows when you look at all of these economic studies, and the FTC, they got 26,000 comments from the public when they were considering this rule. And 25,000 of them were in support of the rule, including from a lot of economists, basically, who started out saying, look, there's a natural experiment. Let's see what actually happens in the real world when we permit or don't permit non-competes. And this was what they found. So, one thing that has been interesting to me, I spent much of my career enforcing labor standards laws in the New York Attorney General's office. And one thing that has been very interesting to me is that non-competes don't actually, it's not as zero-sum and adversarial as many other labor issues are. There are a lot of employers who do not like non-competes because they want to be able to hire the best workers. And on the question of that judges can modify it and that there's some flexibility. Workers, there's a lot of research out there showing a lot of workers in the US don't know what their rights are. And if they get a lawyered up document that's their employment contract, they're going to assume it's valid. And so if there is an overbroad non-compete, that really has no business being in there, most people end up thinking that it's valid and behaving accordingly and don't look for other opportunities, and they're chilled and end up staying in the job. And so even if you have the opportunity where if it ever went before a judge that the non-compete would be limited, who wants to be sued by their employer and ultimately go before a judge? Non-competes really prevent ordinary working people from being able to get a new job.
Well, Andrew, as we mentioned before we started taping here, we know that it's not a surprise that lawsuits have come or appeals have come in the wake of this decision. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce, as we mentioned, filed a lawsuit voting that this rule would affect some 30 million U.S. workers, and also that it's illegal. Is that your stance here, Andrew?
In terms of the law itself, I don't think that the FTC has the authority to do this. I'm not an expert on governmental law, but this isn't something like what they typically do, which is to prevent something from happening. They issue a regulation. This is preventing something that is already happening from ever happening again. And I'm not sure they really have that amount of power, The non-compete issue is very big, like I said, among smaller companies, which are the majority of the companies in the United States. And I'm sure there's going to be a tremendous pushback on this.
That's absolutely for sure. We will see what happens in the future. Lots of money on the line here, either way. Andrew Boddy and Terry Gerstein, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Food is the heart and soul of so many cultures, and recipes passed down from generation to generation help keep those cultural identities alive. But what happens when business gets thrown into the mix? That's what happened when celebrity chef David Chang of Momofuku trademarked one spelling of chili crunch, a crunchy, spicy sauce that's been popular in Asian American communities for decades. He then sent cease and desist letters to several small companies that were already selling it. Chang later apologized and said that he would stop all legal action, but this isn't the first time business and cultural cuisine have clashed. GBH News' Callie Crossley joins me now with her take on this topic. I know it was a big ripple in the culinary world and certainly garnered some headlines there.
Well, you know what? This kind of stuff goes on all the time, so it's not new, except in this way. With celebrity chef David Chang, Asian himself, someone who has been out front in highlighting, celebrating the Asian culture in food, one who's innovated, all of that, and really opened up even more avenues for us who might not know not just the normal kinds of stuff that we think we know about Asian food, but really expanding our palate about it.
Right.
If the call comes from inside the house, as they say in the horror films, you are shocked. So by trademarking chili crisp, which is a condiment used throughout Asia, created by Asians and in this country, that meant that all these little mom and pops businesses could not therefore go forward with the name of the product as it has been sold and used for, I don't know, centuries at this point. So he said he was trying to be certain that he avoided Long Gone Chow Ma's particular bottle. I think people have seen the bottle of chili crisps. It kind of looks like this. Looks like a kind of hourglass figure. That's the one that's really, really popular. But that's not even the one I used. I used Fly by Jing. So you shut her down too. You know what I mean? So there are all these other companies, and it was just so shocking. And it took a while, to your point, you mentioned 7 cease and desist letters before he had to say, wait a minute, that was not my intent. I'm trying to protect my product. But my thing is, hey, you're David Chang. I'm gonna probably buy yours just because you're David Chang at some point, but I enjoy the other products. Don't do that, and don't add to this. You, of all people, know about the cultural appropriation of food. Come on.
Do you think he was trying to keep it in the culture? Like, okay, if one of us owns it, okay.
I think it was just a bottom line. Somebody said, we just make sure if we trademark this is our stuff. I'll make sure I avoid the one company where I think this is the company that people buy the most of from, and we're okay. But we look around and I think about Heinz ketchup. Okay, so they decided they're going to take what is a condiment in many Puerto Rican households called, mayo chip, and that's what they named it. And which is a mix of mayonnaise and ketchup, and put that together, right? And then put it in a bottle and say, hey, here's something new. No, it's not.
Right.
Been in Puerto Rican households all this long time. What are you talking about? And appropriation is when you fail to acknowledge where this came from culturally. You can have cultural appreciation, make a product and say, hey, we got it. We got the idea from the Puerto Rican households. We see everybody likes it. It's expanding out. We thought we'd make a buck on it too, but we know where it came from. That's not what they did. They just put their own version out, tried to act like it was some new thing. Come on, y'all. Come on, y'all.
But is it the same? It's like you go to Walmart and I feel like there's a great value brand of just about every kind of condiment from every culture.
Yeah. Yes and no, but when you start claiming it as your new, not even improved, because improved would mean you would have to acknowledge the cultural antecedents of it. You're not doing that. You're just saying, this was our brand new idea. We think it's great. Remember when they first talked about braids for white women?
Oh, yes.
All right, okay, and then that was a whole new thing. Black women have been doing it for years. Well, the same thing's happening in food. But I've just been interested to see that while it's negative, it can also be positive when the people who created it are a part of it. So I think about Patti LaBelle.
Okay.
Yes. When Patti LaBelle brought her pies out, oh my God, it's almost 10 years ago, everybody lost their minds. Why? They were so authentic in taste. She got the yes, it's so good from people in the community saying it's just like Mama used to make, maybe even better.
Right.
So buy it. She got the money from it. A black marketing exec put that deal together. So you have there a way to share that with other folks, but at the same time, she was able to get the credit for, and we can acknowledge that this is a dish that a lot of African-American communities know as their own. Well,
and you know what? Her marketing team did a great job. Because who hasn't seen that meme with Cardi B who said, ooh, this is smooth. How do you do that? And she goes, that's what I do. And I mean, it was cross-generational.
Absolutely. And for those who think, well, that she had a big rush on the pies. They sold out from Walmart and then it's dead. 2023, $80 million in sales for both her pies and her mac and cheese, which, by the way, if you make it from her cookbook, is delicious as well.
Oh, okay.
So I've also been interested in looking at mambo sauce in D.C. Now, have you ever had mambo sauce?
I haven't, no.
Me either. I know about it.
Right.
It's a sauce that, again, came up from the roots of the African-American community and other folks who came from, the Caribbean, put that together. It's like you go to get a fast food thing and you don't have mambo sauce. Everybody's like, what are you talking about? If you're in D.C., so you feel kind of stupid. Well, that's been kind of the cultural touch point for a long period of time. McDonald's a year ago decided they would add it. Now, they did say it came from the regional area of D.C., from those communities, okay? But I thought it was interesting that McDonald's decided, along with your ranch sauce and your honey mustard, in the D.C. area, you can get mambo sauce as well. And there is one company called Capital City, which is black woman-owned, and she has just made a deal with the Washington Commanders that they would, at their games and the concession stands, use mambo sauce that she created, which obviously comes up from the community. So it doesn't have to be bad. We can acknowledge, we can appreciate, and everybody can come out in the end. I just want to see that happen, and I hope that folks are looking at the David Chang situation, I know he is himself, and saying this is not the way to go.
And I know that, social media can be a wild place and things like that. Wild, right? And so you see some of the appropriation there, and then folks wanting to give it back. You might see folks demonizing ethnic foods and then saying it was a good thing left and right. But I think the difference is when businesses and companies are profiting from it and not giving the correct appreciation of the
or the profits. If that is the case, that needs to happen. I just don't do that, David Chang. Don't do it in the family. Don't do that in the family. We don't want to see that. So glad he came to his senses. And apparently there's some legal thing where you're supposed to stop down people who use your trademark after you have gone through the process. So they got to kind of figure out how to do that now that he, in fact, owns the trademark. So we'll see what happens with that.
I will confess I use the chili flake sauce from Trader Joe's.
Oh, well, see what I'm saying? See, I mean, it's pretty good. I bet you an Asian company makes it, though.
Probably.
Yeah. It's pretty good.
All right, Callie, thank you so much for being with us again.
You're welcome.
And finally tonight, a misconnection doesn't always have to be a loss. James Griffin learned that firsthand when he set out to honor the memory of his late brother, who had died in the Vietnam War. James shared his experience with stories from the stage, and we bring that to you now as part of a partnership between that show and this one.
Summer of 1967, while I was playing Little League Baseball, my brother Tommy went off to Vietnam. He was 19 years old. He was assigned to the Army Postal Unit, and back home we thought that meant he had a desk job and that he'd be safe. 6 months later, as I was watching the evening news with my brothers, the doorbell rang. And when I answered it, there was a large man in uniform standing on my front porch. He leaned over to me and he said, "Son, is your mother at home?" Now, I was 11 years old. Having a man in uniform on the front porch didn't mean anything to me. I just yelled out, "Ma, someone's at the door." When my mother came to the door, she immediately started to cry. The house went into a tizzy. My dad came home from his night job. My older brothers and sisters cried. Aunts and uncles came by the house. Over the next couple of days, friends and neighbors came by the house. Some people dropped off food, and I was able to read the telegram that the officer left my mother. It said, "The Secretary of the Army has asked me to express his deep regrets. Your son, Specialist 4 Thomas Brinsley Griffin Jr., is missing in Vietnam. He was last seen as a passenger on a military aircraft that crashed and burned for unknown reasons." After I read that, I realized my brother wasn't coming home. After we buried my brother, my mother would sometimes say aloud, "I wonder what he was doing on an aircraft." She said she never worried about him because he had a desk job. Flash forward 15 years. I'm hanging at my local barroom with my younger brother, and one of the guys comes up to us and says he met a guy that was delivering something to his work who claimed my brother took his place on a helicopter that went down in Vietnam. He couldn't give me the guy's name. He didn't know where the guy worked. So I just filed that story away. There was no follow-up. My mother died in December of 1985, and she never knew the circumstances around my brother's death. Flash forward another 15 years, it's the late 90s. My father says one night, "I'd really like to know what happened to your brother." And I promised him I'd find out. I figured I have the story from the barroom, and I'll do a quick internet search, and I'll have an answer in about 2 days. I spent a big chunk of the next 2 years on various chat rooms and Vietnam veteran websites and came up with nothing. I remembered my mother had a photograph of my brother with 3 guys in Vietnam, and she had written their names and their home states on the back of the picture. I found it and started randomly calling people with those names in those states, and I came up with nothing. My dad died in October of 2004. And I wasn't able to keep my promise. And I stopped searching soon after that. But every once in a while, I'd type my brother's name into Google, and the first hit would always be the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. And after that, local and state monument sites. 7 years after my dad died, October of 2011, I was sitting at my desk in work, and I typed my brother's name into Google. First hit was the wall in D.C. The second hit was a website called Military Friends Network, and there was a posting on it that was 2 years old that said, "Thomas Griffin took my place on a postal helicopter that went down in Vietnam. Not one day has gone by in the last 40 years where I haven't thought about him." And it was signed, "Respectfully, Doug." My eyes popped out of my head. Oh my God, this is the guy from the barroom story. I had to find him. I wrote emails, I sent letters, I made phone calls and I left voicemails, and I got nothing in response. And I was so dejected because I was sure now that Doug had died in the 2 years between the time he posted and the time I read it. Yet a week later, while I was driving home from my office in downtown Boston, my cell phone rang. And when I answered it, a voice said, "Is this Jim?" I said, "Yes." He said, "This is Doug." I almost drove up on the sidewalk. He apologized for not calling me sooner, but he had been on a business trip to Boston. He had actually been working right down the street from my office. He got very emotional and he told me, "I've never spoken to anyone about this in 40 years, not even to my wife." He told me that he met my brother when my brother came in country in July of 1967. He said they became very close and they worked together in the postal unit. He said in late December 1967, Doug was scheduled to go on R&R to Hawaii, and my brother asked if he could take his place on the postal helicopter runs. Doug ran it by the commanding officer, and everyone signed off, and Doug went off to Hawaii. He said when he came back, my brother was dead. He told me that he stayed in the service for 20 years after the Vietnam War ended. And he worked all over the country and he met all sorts of people and he couldn't remember one of them. But he said, "I'll always remember your brother." He even remembered my brother's birthday, October 24th. When he said that, I had to pull my car over and dry my eyes. I thanked him for getting back in touch with me and asked if we could stay in touch. And he said he would like that. And after that day, I never spoke to Doug again. I've never met him in person. But every Christmas, every New Year, every Memorial Day, every Veterans Day, and every October 24th, I get an email from him. And I respond the same way he responds to me. One of the great highlights of my life is getting in touch with you. I couldn't keep that promise to my dad. But getting in touch with Doug allowed me to reach out and touch my brother one last time. And my brother's memory lives on outside of my family because of Doug and his family. And because of that, I'll always be grateful.
You can catch more stories from the stage Mondays at 9:30 p.m. on World and Fridays at 8 here on GBH2 or anytime on the Stories from the Stage Facebook page and YouTube channel. And you can catch some LGBTQ plus stories from the stage live at the show's Pride Month event next month. For tickets and more info, head to gbh.org/events. That's it for tonight, but come right back here tomorrow while the NBA's top recruits are pulling in multi-million-dollar contracts. Superstars like Angel Reese and Caitlin Clark, well, they're going to be making around $70,000 when they join the WNBA. NBC Sports Boston's Trenny Casey joins me on that and the most important NFL draft for the Patriots in decades. That and more tomorrow at 7. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Crystal Haynes. Good night.